Introduction. The unspoken tension. You walk into a room and the air changes. Conversations pause for just a second too long. Eyes glance your way, then flicker back with a mix of curiosity and unease. People smile, but the smiles don't reach their eyes. Compliments feel cautious, like veiled warnings. You haven't said anything controversial. You haven't done anything aggressive. And yet, your presence shifts the atmosphere. It's not arrogance. You're not trying to dominate. But something about you unsettles people. What you're experiencing is a phenomenon deeper than social awkwardness or misunderstanding. It's psychological, and it has a name. Carl Jung spoke of the unconscious forces that shape our behaviors, fears, and attractions. One of his most enduring contributions was the idea that we project the parts of ourselves we don't want to face onto others. When someone has done the inner work to integrate their shadow, the hidden aspects of their personality, they radiate a kind of power, clarity, and presence that many find difficult to confront. This episode is a journey into the psyche, a dive into the shadows, into archetypes, and into the unsettling truth of what your presence might represent to others. We will explore 10 deep psychological reasons, rooted in Jungian theory, cultural conditioning, and emotional depth, why people might feel intimidated by you. You are not alone in this experience, and you are not the problem. Sometimes the mere act of being whole in a fragmented world is enough to make others uncomfortable. But understanding why this happens can transform isolation into insight and discomfort into empowerment. You carry unresolved archetypes. Every person you meet carries within them ancient psychological blueprints. These are archetypes, primordial energies that live in the collective unconscious. Carl Jung named them the king, the warrior, the magician, the lover, the rebel, the sage, the healer. They're not just mythological figures. They are psychic patterns that play out in our daily lives. Most people suppress some of these archetypes. The ambitious man who buries his inner healer, the selfless caregiver who ignores the call of her inner warrior, the office worker who masks their inner rebel just to keep the peace. These disowned energies don't disappear. They go underground, forming part of the shadow. When you embody an archetype powerfully, especially one that others have repressed, you unconsciously trigger them. If you radiate the confident energy of the king, those who feel powerless will feel threatened. If you live with the integrity of the sage, those who rely on deception may react defensively. If you walk with the compassion of the healer, those who have neglected their own wounds might grow uncomfortable. You don't have to say a word. Your presence alone becomes a mirror. This is the essence of projection. People unconsciously cast their unclaimed qualities onto you. Sometimes they admire you. Other times they resent you. They may call you intimidating, arrogant, too intense, or even dangerous. But what they're really reacting to is the echo of something buried deep within themselves. You represent a version of them they cannot yet access. And that realization, even if it happens below awareness, is profoundly destabilizing. This is why some people seem repelled by your presence, even if you've done nothing to provoke them. Archetypes are emotionally charged. They stir ancient energies. And when you walk as an embodied archetype, especially a balanced one, you disrupt the psychic equilibrium of the room. You're not just a person. You become a symbol, and symbols are never neutral. This is the first reason people feel intimidated by you. Your presence awakens parts of themselves they have long tried to silence. You've integrated the shadow, and most people haven't. Most people spend their lives running from themselves. They run from the guilt that lingers after a harsh word, from the envy that creeps in unnoticed, from the desire to control, to dominate, to be seen. They smile, nod, go to work, attend parties, post filtered photos. But beneath the curated lives, there is a quiet terror, the fear of being found out, not by others but by themselves. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the dark side of the psyche, the hidden vault of shame, rage, lust, grief, and unmet needs. It is everything we deny, repress, and exile in the name of social acceptance. We pretend it isn't there, but it waits. And for those rare few who stop running, who turn inward instead of away, something extraordinary happens. They meet the monster under the bed and discover it was their own reflection. To integrate the shadow is to reclaim the self. It means no longer hiding your wounds or outsourcing your identity to others. It means facing the ugliest truths about yourself and choosing to love yourself anyway. Not in a naive or self-indulgent way, but with fierce honesty, with dignity. But here's the paradox. The more whole you become, the more threatening you appear. Because shadow integration does not make you nicer, it makes you real. You become emotionally sovereign. You speak plainly. You stop fawning for approval. You walk into a room and do not shrink, not because you seek attention, but because you no longer dim your light to soothe others' discomfort. And this kind of presence terrifies people, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you're doing what most cannot. You've looked in the mirror and accepted what you saw. You've embraced the chaos within. You've turned your demons into allies, and those who still live in denial, who cling to the illusion of perfection, feel your presence like a pressure. In the room, they might call you cold, harsh, intimidating, but what they really mean is you're not controllable. In workplaces, you refuse to play the politics. In relationships, you won't pretend just to maintain the peace. In friendships, you won't participate in passive-aggressive rituals of false comfort. You're not interested in performance. You're interested in truth, and truth makes people squirm. In a world addicted to light, shadow is criminalized. We are taught to hide our flaws, to avoid discomfort, to conform to niceness at the expense of wholeness. But niceness is not kindness. And politeness is not integrity. A person who has integrated their shadow may not be nice in the traditional sense, but they are trustworthy. You know where you stand with them. Their no means no. Their yes is wholehearted. This is unsettling to those who were raised in environments where love was transactional, where authenticity was punished, where anger, sadness, or vulnerability were seen as threats rather than truths. When you've done shadow work, you carry an unspoken authority, not superiority, not arrogance, but presence. You can hold contradictions. You can sit with discomfort. You don't flinch when things get messy. And this scares people, not because you're wrong, but because you've become what they secretly want to be. In a sense, you become a mirror to their repression, and mirrors are rarely welcomed. They show us what we'd rather not see, Jung warned, that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate. Most people would rather blame others or circumstances than face the disowned parts of themselves. But the one who integrates their shadow breaks this spell. They stop being a victim of their own darkness. They reclaim agency. They become responsible for their pain, yes, but also for their power. This power is not loud. It does not dominate. It simply is. It radiates through stillness, through honesty, through boundaries that do not bend for approval. And that is why it intimidates. Because when you've befriended your shadow, you cannot be manipulated by those who haven't. You're no longer operating from guilt, fear, or shame. You see clearly. You choose consciously. And in a world built on unconscious agreements, this kind of clarity is revolutionary. It's also lonely. But it is the loneliness of standing in truth, of living without masks, of walking through fire and emerging whole and in that wholeness there is a quiet liberation. You are no longer a fragment, you are a force. You don't seek external validation. There's a quiet shift that happens when you stop asking the world for permission to exist, when you no longer wait for applause to feel worthy, when you don't adjust your posture, your opinions, or your pace based on who's watching. You begin to walk differently, not faster, not louder, just freer. Most people are addicted to validation, and they don't even know it. Their smiles are rehearsed, their values borrowed, their ambitions scripted by expectation. The currency of their self-worth is measured in likes, compliments, and nods of approval. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He saw that the modern individual is often more persona than person, a social mask designed to please, to blend, to be digestible. But masks are heavy, and eventually they suffocate the soul underneath. When you no longer crave validation, people sense something unfamiliar. You become unpredictable, not in a chaotic way, but in a self-contained way. You're no Longer participating in the unspoken contract of mutual ego-stroking. You don't flatter to be liked, you don't perform to be seen. And that unnerves people who need constant reflection to feel real. Your presence becomes disruptive, not because you're aggressive, but because you're sovereign. In social hierarchies, validation is a tool of control. Praise is given to reinforce obedience. Rejection is used to punish deviation. When you are unaffected by either, the game loses its grip on you. You don't laugh at what isn't funny. You don't agree just to keep the peace. You don't fear disapproval because you've already looked within and approved of yourself. That kind of inner freedom cannot be bribed or threatened, and it makes others feel exposed. It reminds them how enslaved they still are. Eastern philosophy speaks to this. The Tao does not seek favor. The sage moves without resistance, acts without needing recognition. Stoicism echoes the same truth. Let praise or blame be irrelevant to your integrity. When you detach from the outcome, you become dangerous to systems that rely on insecurity, to people who measure their worth by comparison. You become a living contradiction to a world that profits from your self-doubt. And yet, your detachment is not apathy. It's not coldness, it's clarity. You're not rejecting people. You're simply no longer molding yourself for their comfort. You've reclaimed the authority to define your own worth. And now you walk through life unhooked, not arrogant, just grounded, not aloof, just centered. And that centering shines a light on how much others are spinning. This is why your presence may be mistaken for arrogance, or distance, or mystery. Not because you've withdrawn, but because you've stepped into alignment and refused to beg for belonging. To need less is not to feel less. It is to carry your value from the inside out. This is power, not dominance. Confidence, not superiority. It is the quiet revolution of being okay without being praised, and it changes every room you enter. You see through manipulation. There's an unspoken rule in most social circles. Don't look too closely. Don't question the compliment that feels hollow. Don't point out the contradiction in someone's story. Don't challenge the smiling mask that hides resentment. Just play along, smile, nod. Be agreeable. But you notice too much. You see the twitch in the jaw before someone lies. You feel the subtle shift in tone when someone's words betray their intent. You can tell when kindness is a performance. You know when silence is a strategy, and you don't look away. That makes people nervous. In a world trained to value harmony over truth, your perception is a disturbance. Most people live through their personas, the socially accepted version of themselves. Jung described the persona as a mask we wear to navigate the expectations of the collective. It's necessary, but it's not real. And when you refuse to respond to the mask, when you look past it and speak to what's underneath, it's like pulling a thread in a carefully woven tapestry. The whole illusion begins to unravel. People don't fear you because you're unkind. They fear you because you can see them, really see them. And many aren't ready to be seen. Those who rely on manipulation thrive on projection. They need you to play a part, the naive follower, the passive listener, the easy mark. When you deviate from the script, when you ask a real question, when you hold silence instead of offering reassurance, it disrupts their control. Your awareness becomes a mirror, reflecting back their intentions, exposing the game. And not everyone wants their game exposed. History tells this story again and again. The truth-seers, the whistleblowers, the spiritual rebels, people who saw through the illusion, were rarely celebrated in their time. They were exiled, ridiculed, or feared. Not for what they did, but for what they revealed. When you see through manipulation, you become immune to it. Flattery doesn't work on you. Guilt doesn't move you. Pressure doesn't trap you. And because of that, manipulators lose their grip. You're not reactive, you're responsive. You don't give your energy to what doesn't resonate. You don't chase validation or approval, so you're not easily baited. That kind of presence is unsettling to those who rely on subtle control to maintain their influence. You force people to confront their own intentions. This doesn't mean you're confrontational. You're not seeking conflict. You're just aligned with reality. And reality is uncomfortable for those hiding from it. There's a strength in your stillness, a quiet refusal to be puppeteered. And in that refusal, People either rise to meet you or retreat to preserve their illusion. Your ability to see through manipulation isn't a threat to truth, it's a threat to deception. And so, you might find that people distance themselves from you, not because you're harsh, but because you're clear. Because you don't buy into false dynamics, because your energy doesn't feed their performance. But that's not your burden to carry. Clarity is not cruelty. Discernment is not judgment. And seeing the truth is not an act of war. It is, in many ways, an act of love, because when you stop enabling the game, you open space for realness, for honesty, for transformation. Not everyone will step into that space, but some will, and they are your people. The rest will call you intimidating, difficult or intense, but really they just know they can't manipulate you, and that's a power worth protecting. You disrupt the social mirror. Human beings are wired for reflection. We become ourselves in the eyes of others, adapting, adjusting, performing. It's not inherently malicious, it's survival. The child learns to smile when praised, to shrink when shamed. The adult carries these reflexes like invisible scripts, playing out the same scenes in new costumes. In most social environments, people unconsciously reflect what's around them. Politeness is mirrored with politeness. Shallow banter is met with a knowing grin. Everyone plays along and the game feels normal. But what happens when someone refuses to reflect back the expected image? When you walk into a room and carry presence without pretense, when you don't laugh at what isn't funny or flatter what isn't admirable, something begins to fracture. The social mirror breaks. You become a disruption. Carl Jung said that the journey of individuation, of becoming a whole self, involves separating from the collective identity. That means refusing to play roles that betray your authenticity. And once you've stepped outside the game, others can feel it. They might not be able to articulate it, but they know you're not playing along. Your authenticity becomes unsettling, because if you're not mirroring their persona, they're forced to see themselves without it, and that's terrifying. You won't call someone brilliant just because they're loud. You won't echo someone's opinion just to avoid conflict. You're not cruel, just real. And in a culture obsessed with maintaining surface harmony, realness is perceived as rebellion. People may say you're too intense. What they mean is you don't make them feel comfortable in their illusions. They may say you take things too seriously. What they mean is you listen deeply when they speak carelessly. They may say you're hard to read. What they mean is you haven't handed them a script, and so they project. They turn their unease into narratives, calling you arrogant, antisocial, or aloof because labeling you helps them feel safe. But none of it is about you. It's about the mirror. You didn't reflect back the version of themselves they wanted to see, and yet this disruption is your gift. You force authenticity to the surface, not with words, but with presence. You offer others a rare opportunity to meet someone who isn't performing and who doesn't expect them to perform either. Few will rise to meet that challenge, but those who do will never forget you. The social mirror breaks when you stop reflecting back what's false, and in that break, something honest is born. You may not always be welcomed, you may not always be liked, but you will always be felt. And in a world addicted to reflections, being real is the most radical thing you can do. You embody depth in a shallow world. In a world addicted to speed, silence feels suspicious. In a culture built on images, introspection looks like invisibility. And when most people are skating across the surface, someone who lives in depth becomes an anomaly, even a threat. Depth is not loud. It's not performative. It doesn't seek attention, but it holds attention when it enters a room. There is something in the way you observe before you speak, the way your eyes linger not out of judgment, but out of presence. You ask different questions. You listen for what isn't said. You feel undercurrents most people are trained to ignore. This unsettles people, not because you are doing anything wrong, but because you are not participating in the usual distractions. Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. But when you embody depth, you silently invite others to face theirs. It's not an invitation they asked for, but it's one they feel. And the human psyche, when caught off guard, often reacts with resistance before reverence. There's a reason mystics were called mad. There's a reason philosophers were exiled, prophets ridiculed, poets dismissed. Because the deep has always threatened the shallow. It reminds the world that there is more, and more is terrifying when you've spent your life clinging to the known. When you live in depth, you value solitude over noise, meaning over momentum. You don't fill silence with small talk. You don't decorate your identity with borrowed ideas, and you don't find purpose in popularity. To many, this looks like detachment, but it's actually devotion to truth, to presence, to integrity. In literature, it's the quiet character who understands more than they speak. In history, it's the misunderstood visionary who plants seeds others are too impatient to water. In psychology, it's the individuated soul who has walked into their own unconscious and returned with gold. You carry that energy, not because you sought it, but because you earned it, and that makes you rare. And the rare is often met with suspicion before admiration. People may mock what they don't understand. They may call your quiet cold, your intellect arrogant, your introspection dark, but that says more about their discomfort than your essence. Still, your presence won't go unnoticed, not to those who are ready. Your depth will act like a magnet, not attracting the many but revealing the few. The ones who are also seeking, also listening, also waking up. And when depth meets depth, something sacred happens. A conversation becomes a sanctuary. A glance becomes an echo. And in that space, the world, and for a moment, it feels real again. You embody depth in a shallow world. It may cost you ease, but it grants you meaning. And that is a trade the soul never regrets. You don't belong to a tribe. Tribes offer safety, the comfort of shared beliefs, the warmth of agreement, the illusion of certainty. They tell you who the enemy is. They give you a script. They teach you when to cheer and when to stay silent. But what happens when you don't follow the script? When you question the dogma, not just of politics or religion, but of identity itself? You become dangerous, not because you're violent, but because you're unpredictable. Because in a tribal world, a sovereign mind is a threat. Carl Jung warned of this very thing, the loss of the individual in the tide of the collective. When people merge too deeply with a group identity, they outsource their thinking. They trade nuance for narrative, complexity for clarity. And when you don't do the same, they don't know what to make of you. You don't wear the uniform, literally or metaphorically. You're too liberal for the conservatives, too conservative for the liberals, too spiritual for the skeptics, too skeptical for the spiritual. You walk between worlds, and no world claims you. This terrifies people, not because they hate you, but because your ambiguity reveals their dependency. They rely on labels to know who is safe, who is right, who is us, but you live in the in-between, and the in-between has always been misunderstood. History has seen this before. Mystics who were neither priest nor heretic, artists who refused allegiance to movements, thinkers who resisted categorization and were punished for it. To be tribeless is to be misread. People will project onto you what they fear or cannot define. They'll call you aloof, arrogant, even traitorous. But what they really mean is, I can't control you. I can't place you. I can't predict you, and still you walk on. Not because you enjoy isolation, but because you refuse imitation. Not because you hate belonging, but because you refuse to shrink for it. You are building a self, not a slogan. You are carving an identity from the inside out. This is the path of individuation, Jung's sacred journey toward becoming whole. It is not a rebellion for rebellion's sake. It is the natural consequence of asking deeper questions and refusing easy answers. And here's the paradox. Though you don't belong to a tribe, you begin to attract others like you, the wild ones, the seekers, the ones who also refuse to sell their souls for safety. Together you form something rare, not a tribe in the traditional sense, but a constellation, each star burning with its own light, yet part of a greater pattern. Not uniformity, but unity. Not conformity, but resonance. So if you feel alone in your clarity, in your refusal to belong where you don't, know this: you are not lost. You are free. And freedom in a tribal world will always feel like a threat before it's recognized as a gift. You force people to confront their own inauthenticity. You walk into a room and say nothing. Yet something shifts. You don't criticize, you don't accuse, and still people bristle. They look away, they make excuses. They talk too much or too little. Why? Because without meaning to, you hold up a mirror. And what they see in that mirror is everything they're pretending not to be. When you live authentically, when your values, choices, and words align, you become a silent disruption. You don't have to expose anyone. Your existence does it for you. Carl Jung called this projection. People cast the parts of themselves they cannot face onto others. Their envy becomes your arrogance. Their shame becomes your cruelty. Their self-betrayal becomes your threat. You didn't ask to carry these projections. You simply chose to stop lying to yourself. You chose truth, even when it was inconvenient, even when it hurt. But in a world built on performance, authenticity becomes an act of rebellion. When you say no without guilt, when you tell the truth gently but firmly, when you refuse to laugh at cruelty or engage in empty flattery, you force people to feel the dissonance between who they are and who they pretend to be. And that's intolerable for some. They might gossip. They might mock you. They might claim you think you're better than them. But what they're really saying is, I'm not ready to meet myself. I don't know how to be that free. I'm scared of what your honesty stirs inside me. Because the moment someone sees your self-respect, they can no longer unsee their self-abandonment. And here lies your power and your burden. You're not intimidating because you're loud. You're intimidating because you're real. In a sea of masks, your bare face is unsettling, but this isn't a call to shrink. It's a call to stand taller. You are not responsible for other people's refusal to confront their shadow. You are responsible for staying true to yourself. There's a quiet kind of courage in that, the courage to be disliked for the right reasons, to lose approval but gain integrity, to walk away from belonging that costs your soul. And here's the beautiful irony. The more you live authentically, the more you inspire others to do the same, even if they resist it at first. Your presence becomes a seed. Some reject it. Some water it in secret, but either way you are a reminder that freedom is possible, that masks can be removed. That life doesn't have to be a performance. So if your authenticity makes others uncomfortable, let it. Discomfort is how the truth stretches into the light, and you, simply by being you, are helping the world remember itself. You're comfortable in silence and solitude. Most people fear silence, not because it's empty, but because it's full. In silence, the noise of the world fades, and the noise within begins to rise. Thoughts long buried, feelings long denied, memories long forgotten, they all surface when the volume drops. So most people keep talking, scrolling, consuming, anything to avoid hearing the truth echo back from within. But you don't run from silence. You sit with it. You welcome it like an old friend. And that makes others uneasy. In a culture that worships stimulation and fears stillness, your comfort in solitude is radical. You don't need constant validation. You don't fear being alone. You've learned to befriend your own mind, and that's a power few possess. Psychologically, this unnerves people. Your ability to enjoy your own company confronts their inability to sit with themselves. It reminds them how addicted they are to distraction, how desperately they avoid their own depth. Carl Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." Your presence whispers of that awakening, not with words but with your being. And awakenings, though necessary, are rarely comfortable. You don't chase noise, you choose peace, and in doing so, you reveal how anxious the world truly is. You carry a stillness that acts like a mirror, a stillness that suggests it's okay to stop running. It's okay to be with yourself. But not everyone is ready to hear that. So your silence is misunderstood. People call you aloof, detached, cold. What they don't see is the fire within your stillness, the clarity in your quiet, the strength in your solitude. You've learned what most people avoid, that solitude isn't loneliness. It's communion with the soul. And when you walk through the world with that kind of self-containment, you become a mystery, Not because you hide, but because you've stopped performing. In a world of noise, your silence roars. You radiate inner authority, true. Power is quiet. It doesn't demand the room. It is the room. It's not in raised voices or forced smiles. It's not in the need to prove, persuade, or perform. It's in presence, the unmistakable energy of someone who knows who they are. When you've done the hard work of healing, when you've faced your fears, befriended your shadow, questioned your conditioning, you emerge with something rare, inner authority. This authority doesn't seek permission. It doesn't wait for validation. It doesn't ask, is it okay if I exist this way? It simply exists, fully, unapologetically. And people feel it. They may not understand why you unsettle them. You don't fit neatly into roles. You don't collapse under pressure. You don't mask your soul to make others comfortable. That calm, steady presence. It makes noise without a sound. Jung called this the path to individuation, the process of becoming whole. Not perfect, not superior. Whole and wholeness has weight. It has gravity. It pulls at people's unconscious, awakening something they've buried, the desire to be real. But before it inspires, it often threatens, because inner authority can't be controlled. It resists manipulation. It doesn't bend to collective anxiety. It walks a different path, and not in rebellion, but in truth. When you radiate this kind of presence, people project onto you. Some see you as a leader, others see you as arrogant. Some are drawn to your clarity, others are repelled by your calm. But none can ignore you. Why? Because you carry the energy of someone who has returned to themselves. And in a world of echo chambers and identity crises, that kind of authenticity is a lightning strike. Rare, electrifying, and deeply unsettling. It's not about dominance, it's about rootedness. You've stopped outsourcing your worth. You've made peace with your past. You've claimed your voice, not the loudest, but the truest. This is what inner authority looks like. And whether you speak or stay silent, enter or exit, smile or simply observe, the room shifts.